share my version of it with them, so they know
Yeah.
kind of like what's going on with me, and I'll let them share some of theirs with each other. So
Okay.
I think it's
That's-
kind of cool to see.
That's
where
great.
everybody's coming.
That's really good. And that's a great strategy for doing it yourself first and then sharing with them, kind of role modeling. So that's one of the things that with the I'm From poem, that's something that I usually do as well. So I like that. That's a good suggestion. So the biography paper, but first having them the kind of rank how they identify and by level of importance. So really good. One more.
So I start almost all of my class periods with them just writing. So I give them a prompt, and the prompt on that particular day would be, you have at least 15 categories, and identify yourself. And so they have about 5 minutes to write down 15 single word or two-word identifiers about themselves. And so inevitably it'll be, male, Christian, but certain ones will be missing.
Okay.
Maybe inevitably something will be missing about the person. And so as students share, we'll write not only what they said, but their category. So Christian, if Christian's first, Christian, now we have a religion column. And so anytime somebody mentions religion, we'll see the diversity there within religion. And then once we get those categories, it usually ends up being about 15. We can say, okay, well, what's missing from each one of these columns? Which one's most important to you? Why was this one listed first? What categories to describe a person can you look at them and see? Which ones would you not know looking at them? Which ones did you run out of space? Did you skip one in your mind that was important to you, and just to get to 15 because you didn't want to share that one? It's just a good way for them to visualize the diversity in the room, but kind of in like a data way, and it's not attached to me.
Okay, great. Any other suggestions? Yes.
I was just going to say, I don't know if anybody has seen this, but piggybacking off of what Casey mentioned, there's a new Coca-Cola ad that is about stereotypes where they pull in, I think they're all male, but they pull them all into a room, turn out the lights, and they describe themselves. And everybody around the table then talks about what they think that person looks like. And then when they turn on the lights, it's very eye-opening. So if you did something like that, that'd be a cool thing to show as well.
I haven't seen that. Okay. So Coca-Cola, new Coca-Cola stereotype ad. Okay.
I've also seen a video online, I would have to search for it, that has a screen up and you see skeletons behind it dancing, and then the people come out.
Okay.
And it's eye-opening to see. It's
Yeah.
not, it emphasizes that you developed an idea based on how they were dancing, who was coming out.
I bet that is
behind
good.
the thing.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, BuzzFeed has lots of different videos out there, so that if you want to do kind of the introduce the multimedia, that they have some really great ones. I'm sure we could probably pull together some other examples, but yeah, that's a great tool to show the video and then have that discussion afterwards for sure. Any other comments regarding additional resources?
I want to say, in addition to you finding videos, a lot of times it's good to ask them just in general, like, hey, what you watch on TV last night? Like, don't ask about a specific thing, because if you can find something from that thing that you can then integrate as a question about diversity, you've already gotten something they're interested in, right? So you don't have to hook them in or make them feel vulnerable. And sometimes they're talking about something totally inappropriate, and then you can ask them, well, why would that be inappropriate to talk? And why might that offend someone else and things? And just from a pedagogical standpoint, I think that's, especially for freshmen, a good way to get them involved in their own learning experience, so that when they're watching the Coke ad, they're not just being like, hey, I really wish I had a Coke right now. So get them to think all the time.
Great. Okay.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily here. I'm actually teaching a class this semester on representations of gender and sexuality in visual media. So I've been doing a ton of kind of research, looking at how representation of gender and sexuality have changed. Television, movies, music videos, advertising, editorial media, all that stuff. So I don't kind of have it in a list or anybody, but if anybody would like to be pointed towards some of that stuff, you know, to possibly use when in some of these discussions. So I think a really good one is looking at, there was a thing done in 1960 called The Rejected, that was about rejecting basically homosexual in society, and compare that to a new documentary done by the Times within the last couple of weeks on transgender people in the service, military service, and just how different the tone of the two documentaries are, you know, so.
Okay. So the last thing we wanted to just share, just some general kind of tips in terms of embracing diversity around you and things that you could also share with your students. So expanding the knowledge base, you know, really stepping outside of the comfort zone. And so I appreciate you sharing earlier that, you know, this is a place for me to learn more, and recognizing that, and really encouraging them to take advantage of all the things that are to offer here on campus. I always say, I don't think you'll ever be in a more diverse place than a college campus, right? So there are so many free opportunities, especially. And I know they all have to usually do that one cultural thing, but really encourage them to take that little step further, and I would say be vigilant in deciding what constitutes a cultural event too, right? So don't let them water it down. Like, really encourage them to step outside of the comfort zone and do something that they're really going to get something out of. Being aware of your own biases, and so becoming aware of how not only you, and so we talked about this earlier, checking your own, you're checking yourself and recognizing how you might have some impressions or kind of preconceived thoughts about who your class is and who they are, but also taking that, you know, sharing that with them and recognizing that as a student here, you know, talk to someone that doesn't look like you, or just sparking those like conversations, and you never know what may come of that. Be mindful of the language you use. So here I think it's really important to think about using, like, you checking your own language, so making sure that you use person-centered language. So a student with a disability or a person with a visual impairment versus like a handicapped person or a deaf person. Like, always put the person first. If you hear students using terms such as like, that's so gay or that's so retarded, those sorts of things, you want to make sure that you confront those immediately. Don't allow that type of language in your classroom. Yes.
I have one quick thing that I think includes all these together. Don't teach diversity, reflect diversity. So thinking about the images that you're using, or the, you know, extra readings or whatever, find things that reflect diversity when you're teaching. Mm-hmm. So most people probably don't know, most people don't know that a woman actually discovered the double helix DNA before Watson and Crick did.
Not true.
Well,
some of her work contributed, but
well,
it's not
sorry.
so.
But I guess
but also don't say things that you don't know for sure.
Well,
Right?
but you know, but kind of diversify your examples and things like that when you're doing it. So.
Yeah. Okay. Don't ask your students to speak for the entire group. So, for example, thinking about that activity that I did, where we had people sit and stand and identify. If you had only one person in the room who was, maybe that identified with one of those areas, you don't want to call that person out and say, "Well, tell me about, you and your entire group of people," that kind of thing. You don't ever want to do that. It's okay for everybody to kind of share their experiences, but you don't ever want to single that one person out just based off of their membership in a particular group. Yes.
Well, going back to the comment you made before, if a student does say something like that, so retarded or whatever, what is a good way to respond?
So the way you want to call that person in. So, why did you say that? What did you mean when you said it? Do you realize that this might be offensive to people? And these are the reasons why. So you always want to explain it, because otherwise if you ignore it, they won't know. But if you just say, "Oh, don't say that," they may not know why or understand why. So, making a connection that this could be offensive or hurtful to a particular group of people. Or maybe someone in here who's family member. So maybe, you know, someone's family member could have mental or physical disabilities, and you're making a comment that could be, you know, hurtful to those individuals. So they're kind of coming from it from that aspect. If you don't ever know, even though someone may not physically, you know, look a certain way, or you may not know that they identify a certain way, making those sorts of comments could still be offensive, and so you want to avoid those. But one of the probably the most the best examples I can also share in terms of language we had, and the instructor, and how important that is in terms of students who may be impacted, seeing the instructor step up and say something. And that happened at the first day of class last year. That was my first year here, so it's like my first experience with a student who, African American female, in her history class. She was excited, had a great experience here so far, welcome week and everything. Her first day of class, 9 a.m. Monday morning class, she sat down, and another white female student said, "I don't sit next to the N-word," and gets up and like walks away. And so she thought that the instructor heard it and didn't say anything. Now in hindsight, the instructor didn't hear it. Because I think we think that if he had, because he was very much like upset about it, he did not hear it, but she thought he did. And so that to her was just worse than, the student saying it. She decided, she didn't want to go back to that class. And so we worked with her and the instructor, and she stayed in that instructor's section. She just moved to a different section of the class. And so that was largely part because he was very much, he would have, I think, said something from the beginning. So you have to be very, like when you hear those sorts of things, because sometimes that like silence can mean maybe a thought that you may agree, or that you may also feel the same way. And so you want to make sure that you always and immediately say something if you hear those sorts of things in your classroom, for sure. And I think that just goes to creating a welcoming environment, right? So it's no big lesson to teach there. It's just all about making sure that everyone feels welcome, and that your classroom is also inclusive and it's an affirming environment. Just two others: avoid stereotyping remarks. So don't make blanket statements. Don't maybe say things that you're not sure about, or just assuming or making assumptions about a whole group of people based off of some stereotypical information. And then interrupting the insensitive jokes or hurtful comments. So that goes back to the language and those sorts of things. And it may not be easy, but it is the right thing to do. And it's better to say something than nothing at all, for sure. Okay. So those are just some tips again for you, but also the things that you can also share with your students in terms of their roles here on campus, and connecting it all. Oh, one more. Speak up, don't be silent. So I think that goes hand in hand too. But that goes all of this goes back to the creed and the respect and dignity of each person. The other thing that you can use as part of that conversation is the respect and M tenets. And it's really about role modeling that appropriate behavior for all members of the community. And so I think this reminds me kind of your comment earlier. It doesn't matter if the group is all white or all black or whoever, all Christian or all, whatever their identities may be. I think we can all work towards creating a place that is more welcoming and inclusive of all of our community members. Okay. Anything else y'all want to add to this question? Okay. So any questions from you all? Any additional thoughts, reflections? Yes.
Are there any of the Respect the M stickers, flyers, things available right now?
The Dean of Students office, I do believe,
Just got
has some.
bookmarks in.
Okay.
The bookmarks?
The bookmarks are in. Yeah, they can just pop on there and grab something short.
Okay. I think that's a great like when you talk about the creed, also keep the Respect the M tenets in mind. All first year students have seen that presentation during orientation, but I think it's good to certainly refresh them. Yes.
I guess it's for you. I noticed the LS training for students. When's the LS training for new staff and faculty?
So the Center for Inclusion will coordinate student training, and the ISOM Center will coordinate faculty staff training.
Right now, I'm trying to think. The Tuesday before the school starts, I think it's around the 17th.
Will there be an email
We'll
sent out,
send-
or-
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna,
So-
we haven't started marketing it yet, but we will soon.
And secondly, and not as importantly, if anybody didn't eat their cookie.
If anybody didn't eat their cookie, there's a gentleman in the back who wants to. I wanted fire. I wanted to. It was good. Any other thoughts?
Okay. Bidding has been shut down.
I just had
Carry on.
You can go now. He has his cookie. The world is right.
I have two questions about some of your programs. Tell me about the Are You Ready dialogue series and then the close cultural adventure trip.
Okay, so the Are You Ready dialogue series, we, of course, well, everything started last year because we were new. So we identify different topics. We identify some of those in advance or as things come up, like kind of national events. So last year we did one during LGBT History Month. We did one about telling our stories and like really looking at what it means to be LGBTQ member of the community here at Ole Miss. We also did one following the Ferguson grand jury decision. We hosted one in the spring following the SAE fraternity incident at Oklahoma. So it's usually an hour to an hour and a half topic. And so students can just come. We set ground rules at the beginning just about, listening and respecting others, seeking to understand and then to be understood. And they've all been just wonderful conversations. We've talked about a lot of different things. The rooms are usually pretty full. After the Ferguson grand jury decision, we were in here. It was standing room only. I mean, it was like jam-packed. And so if we do take attendance and there's, so if you ever sent your students there, we could verify if they attended or not. The Close Cultural Adventure Trip, we did the first one in February, and we'll continue to do those at least once, maybe twice a semester, where we take a group of students away from campus to like a local city or attraction that allows them to explore some aspect of diversity. So this past year we went to Memphis for a private viewing of the movie Selma, and then we went to the National Civil Rights Museum. And so we will likely start to do the Civil Rights Museum trip every semester. We were so surprised at the number of students who had not ever been, and like it's only an hour away, so we'll likely do that moving forward. So all of those things, we will be sure to market those so that you can share that information with your students. Any other questions? Yes.
Going back to that example you gave of the student you sat next to,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to sit next to,
Right.
Obviously that student doesn't care about being hurtful or hateful, so, how would you handle that? Because, if you're going to call a person out, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm. In that particular situation, I think it's probably best to remove the student from the room, like at that moment, and like have the conversation outside of the class, like not in front of everybody else. You could also always address something and say, that's inappropriate if you're not ready to respond at that moment. That's inappropriate behavior. It will not be allowed in this classroom, and we will discuss it after class. So at least you've addressed it, and then you can take some time to have a think about it, or you schedule a meeting to think about it. So Anisha Mitchell and I co-chair the Bias Incident Response Team, and so we can, if you kind of say we're going to come back to this, we can then work with you to either work with the student